is what do we do with the debt as part of this? Because we have to be able to pay it off somehow, some way. But we lower the value of the debt by raising the price of gold.
Yeah.
And then you enrage the people who get screwed because they own the debt.
The Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever. The Financial Survival Network.
And welcome. You are listening to and watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Kerry Lutz. John Rubino is back with us. And boy, have we got a lot of stuff to talk about here, John. I mean, so much for intros here. First, we kind of got brought together by gold, and gold is over $3,000. I'm sure they're going to knock it down below. Maybe they'll get it down to 2,800. But as you noted, gold and copper have both hit all-time highs this month.
Yeah. Hey, Kerry, in the past month, gold and copper both went, and you can put a chart out going to the from the like 1980s, 1970s to today, and it is a phenomenally good-looking bull market. Even though it didn't always feel like that for us, right? There were these long stretches where that was one of the most gold, for instance, was one of the most boring things to be in, and what a disappointment. Yes. But you look at that long-term chart, and this was a rockin' bull market for all of this century, for sure. Since 2000. Gold has outperformed the S&P 500, which how many people would guess that after this epic equities bull market that we've seen so far? And then copper is starting to come around. People are finally figuring out that copper is not this boring old tech thing. It's an energy metal. It's an energy transition commodity that we have to have if AI is actually going to be a big force in the world going forward, because AIs require massive amounts of electricity. Can't get that without copper. So anyhow, the mining stocks are finally starting to respond to this long kind of secretive gold bull market and the kind of sudden one with copper. And it turns out that the best profile for a mining stock is copper/gold, right? If you have those two things now, you're getting very wide profit margins, because every ounce or pound or whatever of whatever you're selling is becoming more valuable. You're getting more cash, and your costs aren't really going up recently because oil has gone down in the last year. It went from 80 some dollars a barrel to 60 some dollars a barrel recently. And that means mining, which is an energy intensive business, didn't get more expensive in the past year, or at least not way more expensive. So you're seeing these wide profit margins, and first quarter earnings this year are going to be excellent because gold went up again in the first quarter. And that means that a lot of the good quality gold and silver and copper miners are going to put up excellent numbers, and maybe the kind of numbers that show up on the radar screens of momentum investors. So you get momentum investing money coming into what has been a kind of a specialist, value-oriented investing community that's very small, very thinly traded, and you could see a lot of action going forward because of that. And I'm doing a Substack post on one of the stocks that really benefits from this. And to give an example here, Sandstorm Gold is a royalty company that a few years ago made a big acquisition to guarantee its growth for the next decade, but it took on a massive amount of debt in the process, and that debt has been weighing them down. They've been whittling at it, but they haven't gotten it paid off yet. But now people are looking at that stock and going, wow, with their margins widening out, they make like $2,500 per ounce of gold that they sell. They're going to be able to really take a bite out of that debt, which means their interest costs are going to go down, which means their cash flow is going to go up because of interest costs and because they're selling more gold. And it turns out they got a lot of copper too. So suddenly, this is the profile of the stock that you really want to own after 3 or 4 years of just languishing. And I think there's a lot of that going on in the precious metal sector right now, where boring companies that just didn't look that interesting were putting up that graded numbers or anything. Suddenly, in the fourth quarter of 2024 and now the first quarter of 2025 look like growth stocks. So I think this is if we avoid that correction that you mentioned as a real possibility, if gold doesn't drop back down to $2,500 an ounce or copper down to $4.50 a pound, I think a lot of these stocks are going to be treated like growth stocks by the investment community, and they're going to have a really nice run.
And, at the same time, the majors, we got depleting reserves, dwindling reserves, and M&A has to heat up because otherwise, at some point, 5 years down the road, their production's going to fall off a cliff, and that will cause a lot of turmoil in these companies. So they got to start buying again soon. It's funny that you mentioned the S&P. I actually had ChatGPT. I said, come up with a chart, show me the relative rates of return since 1999, which was when I started buying gold. All right. And it had it down at like 290. I think I bought it 280. And show me silver and S&P 500 and then tech stocks, the top five. Now, gold was somewhere around 9 and change percent. Silver was 7.5%. The S&P, believe it or not, was only 5%. I think the Dow was a little bit more.
That means even with dividends, the S&P did not outperform gold.
I didn't calculate on, but I did do total returns, so that included dividends. And the tech stocks were like, for that 25-year period, we're at 17 and change. But then I did it for the past 5 years. So obviously gold was up to like 11% or something, and silver was up. The tech stocks were yielding 30+%. I didn't even bother doing it with Bitcoin because
I was going to say Bitcoin.
No point. Because it just goes. But exactly what you're saying is exactly it. Now, obviously there was a lot of periods there where gold was underperforming or not performing, and the stock market was overperforming. But it just amazed me when I ran that chart how it normalized, John, over that 25-year period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that chart that you ran is basically a portrait of an over-liquefied economy. They were dumping so much new money into the banking system and the rest of the economy that basically everything caught a bid. And everything went up, so they went up by varying amounts, but still those multi-trillions of dollars of new credit that the U.S. government was creating and that the Japanese and Chinese and European governments were all creating, that flowed into financial assets and to a lesser extent real assets. I mean, real estate went through the roof too. If you put house prices on that chart, it would have been right there with tech stocks just about.
I'll put the housing. I will run that chart. I'll post it in the show notes.
Yeah, good. And so what that means though is that going forward, some of these overvalued assets have to crash. And historically, when tech stocks have a decade of 30% plus annual gains, they join the 90% club. They just fall off the table.
Xerox, IBM.
Oh yeah, I mean, Amazon went down by 90% in between 2000 and 2002. So even the really high quality tech stocks get so wildly overvalued when we when a new technology catches our eye and we decide that it's going to change the world and it's going to go up forever and we can pay anything for the related stocks, those stocks get so overvalued that they can drop by 50% and just be fairly valued again. But they never stop at 50%. They have to keep on going down to the depths of despair. And I think there's a decent chance that that's the NASDAQ over the next few years, but
Wouldn't doubt it.
with what governments are doing, though, it's very hard to predict because this is not very similar to these older market bubbles and bursting bubbles and busts, because we've already taken on this insane amount of debt. So normally, historically, you had to work that debt off via a huge crisis. But this time around, nobody's playing that game. China just increased their money supply parabolically. It just went straight up. So they've got a real estate bust that they're trying to liquefy their way out of. Europe was already, well, at least France was just refusing to obey the European Union deficit rules. They were borrowing way more money than they were allowed to. And now that the US has apparently abandoned NATO, you got Germany and France and a lot of the rest of Europe embarking on this massive military buildup, and they're going to exempt military spending from the deficit caps. So they're still going to keep to their deficit caps, except they're going to spend way more money over here off balance sheet. And so we've got this massive wave of government liquidity. Oh, and of course the U.S. We're running $2 trillion deficits. And the first 5 months of this fiscal year was a record high deficit for the US. No crisis, no war or anything. We're running record high deficits. So what does that do to financial assets? That's an amazing amount of liquidity. You would think it would be very inflationary and it would crush the currencies, but it might elevate a lot of really speculative kinds of momentum stocks. So we'll see. You know, this is a really hard call based on history, because you've got things pointing in different directions. And I don't really have an answer for that, except that I think gold and silver are going to do real well. They should be one of the beneficiaries, precious metals, going forward.
Yeah. Trump is good for metals, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so the question is, I mean, this is too early for us to start talking about this, but you and I are going to have a recurring topic at some point, which is, when should you start taking profits in precious metals related assets? And so I'll just tell you my strategy right now is that, like you said, the big guys have to buy out the little guys to top up their reserves. So own a portfolio, which is a big cross section of the mining industry. And when a big guy buys your smaller player, just take that out in cash. You know, just cash out of that. Don't wait for the big guy's stock to hit your account. Just cash out and let the market tell you how to build up cash via the acquisition binge. And so you don't really have, if you make that your rule, you don't really have to think about whether this little explorer should be worth 1 billion or 3.5 billion or what, you know, whatever, which you can't calculate that. You can't really figure out what those things are worth. But if Newmont thinks it's worth 2 billion and they're going to, you know, give you Newmont stock that reflects that, then you just sell the stock on the day of the announcement. So anyhow, little strategy.
Historically, they haven't been too good in these investments, the majors. You know, some of them worked out really well, but they bought a lot of garbage the last time.
Well, yeah, because, you know, during precious metals bull markets, they have massive cash flow. And what CEO can just sit on a huge and rising cash flow stream? You know, it burns a hole in their pocket. They start building empires and they overpay for acquisitions. So let the big guys overpaying be your signal to start raising cash. And there have been very few acquisitions in my portfolio so far. Silvercrest Metals got bought out just lately,
right?
But that's it, I think. You know, so I'm looking forward to writing some Substack posts with titles like "Our third acquisition," "Our fourth acquisition." You know, when they start getting bought out. But
amazing, amazing. So, hey, what about Doge? Can you believe the amount of fraud that is present? I mean, we knew it was there. We just didn't know perhaps how extreme a grift it was. And all these senators' wives or head of NGOs, which are getting billions from the government, and all the, you know, all the social agendas that this money was going into. DEI and, is insane.
Well, it turns out here's how it works. Well, start with the basic premise, which is that the federal government is a big money laundering operation. And
Mm.
that's basically the thing that they figured out how to do. So they created this constellation of entities that are related to the government in some way. Let's say you graduate from Georgetown and you can go be a congressional aide for a while. Then you hop over to a consultant that works for government or to a lobbyist. And then you go to a think tank for a while. And then you go to an NGO, like the ones that are
Yeah.
funded by USAID. And you spend some time overthrowing foreign governments in other countries. And at each stop, you get a nice salary, you get an impressive title, you do zero work that benefits society in any way. So it's basically a series of sinecures. And at the end of your career, 40 years later, you retire and everybody's impressed with all the titles you had. You made a ton of money, so you're
Yeah.
rich, but you accomplished nothing for society.
Yeah, zero.
And that's
Actually, it's worse than nothing.
wait, and
injure it.
yeah, and along the way, you kick back a lot of this money by contributing to political campaigns of the senators and congressmen who funded you in the first place. So
Yes.
it's a kind of a closed loop where we create the money out of thin air and then we redistribute it via this money laundering operation. And that is what Doge is showing us. All these things. That Stacey Abrams thing, did you see that?
Oh my God. If she's worth 2 billion, then you and I are worth 1 trillion, John.
That lady has never done anything. She ran in a couple of elections and lost, and she's written a couple of kind of bodice ripper romance novels, and that's it. But they gave her $2 billion, just created out of thin air because why not? It's all funny money anyhow. It's all play money, and now she got caught, so they took that money away.
They clawed back 20 billion from the EPA. What does she know about the environment?
Well, the EPA, that 20 billion from the EPA, they just handed it out to entities that didn't even exist before they started handing it out. They just made up a website and then gave that website billions of dollars with the promise that website would spend that money on environmental related things in the future at some point. But see, with these NGOs, it's really important to understand how these things work because it sounds like, you look up their website or some other explanation of what they do, and it looks like they're above board charities.
Yeah.
But what they do is they take in a bunch of money. They pay the salaries of people who work for it, and then they pay out maybe 10% of what they took in to the actual beneficiaries, to the people who are being helped in theory. So it's basically just a jobs program for people from the political class and the expert class. So it's someplace where they can sit while their party is out of power. Mm-hmm. So they don't go broke. They can still eat while the Democrats are out of power, or the Republicans. And this is bipartisan. The Republicans do a bunch of this stuff too, which is why Doge is a dangerous thing for Elon Musk to do, because there are Republicans as well as Democrats who would, because he's threatening everybody's grift. But it's a bigger Democrat thing than a Republican thing. So if Doge just shuts down the whole pipeline, says, okay, from now on, governments send zero money to NGOs. Mm-hmm. If they did that, that would hurt more Democrats than Republicans. So there is a political angle to it.
It's like U.S. aid used to be an equal opportunity grift. They were equally stealing from it, but not in these numbers. The grift was always there, but now it's metastasized. The vampire squid, where they're just stealing so much that the whole thing's collapsing. So it's going to be interesting to see, because Musk is convinced he can cut $1 trillion off. I'd be surprised if he didn't do more than that. But what about the courts? Like the whole agenda, the whole Trump agenda, these renegade judges are just trying to derail. It's going to have to go to the Supreme Court. Who knows about those people? certain members of the court. But, you know, eventually Trump is going to have to say, no mas, I'm not going to listen to you guys. And then we are going to have the constitutional crisis.
Yeah, Trump can't say no to the Supreme Court, especially a conservative Supreme Court. So, but
Yeah.
what he's doing now, he's trying everything he can think of and letting it go to lower courts with the idea of you get it up to the Supreme Court and they'll let us do some of this stuff, because I don't think they know ahead of time what they're going to be doing a year from now. But
Yeah.
they're just throwing everything out, letting the courts decide which kinds of corruption they go after and the mechanism for going out. Because, if you want to send illegal immigrants back, there is a process. It's just slow and expensive. And Trump wants to be able just to round up anybody who looks like they might be dodgy, put them on a plane and send them to El Salvador, to an El Salvador in prison. Now that
Supermax.
yeah, see, he probably can't get away with that because there will have to be some kind of a process, but he wants to figure out how much of this he can get away with and how much of a process he has to put up with when the time comes. So that's what I think is going to happen is a lot of these court cases are going to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to kind of pick and choose the ones that they're going to let Trump do. And then Trump and Doge will just do those things, and they'll use the things they're not allowed to do as campaign arguments in the midterm elections. They'll say, man, we got a lot done, but we could get so much more done if you just help us replace all these bad judges with good judges. That could be the thing they run on in the congressional elections in the midterms. So
it's going to be interesting.
I think to the extent that there's a plan, that's what the plan is.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see how this goes. I mean, the process for deporting aliens is so unwieldy, this due process thing, which there is no reading of or proper interpretation of the Constitution that says these illegal aliens, especially criminal ones, have the right to stay here. It's just not.
That's actually a question. It'll be interesting to see this question be answered, which is, does somebody who's here illegally have the protection of the Bill of Rights? Like, do they actually have rights here, or can they just be picked up off the street, flown to some other country? And some of the courts right now sounds like they're saying, yes, they have a right to some kind of due process. And then that's going to go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is 6-3 conservative in theory, but John Roberts is not necessarily conservative in practice, and that brings it to 5-4. And then what's the woman with the high voice, the conservative
Barrett,
Amy Coney Barrett, yeah, she's. She can be kind of a swing vote too. So none of this is guaranteed. But when you start with a 6-3 quasi-conservative majority, some stuff ought to be possible. Trump should get a win on some of these things.
The public, though, let's not underplay the public's sentiment here. According to some of these surveys, 70%, 80% are in favor of tossing these, reprobates that have come in from all over the world to rape, steal, and pillage, 70-80%. It's the Supreme Court is going to have a really hard time ignoring the public's will here.
Well, but see, you don't want the Supreme Court to be watching polls, though, right? You want them to make as objective as possible a judgment based on the Constitution, because once they start doing what's popular, then it goes really badly for conservatives on a lot of issues too, But we'll see.
FDR,
Yeah. Well,
they resisted, and eventually they gave in. So.
Yeah, well, FDR tried to stack the court too, which he failed at. He tried to add a whole bunch of new justices, which is that's liable to be a platform plank for the Democrats in the next election. I mean, if the Supreme Court rules for Trump on a lot of these issues, then the Democrats will run on a program of stacking the court too. We're going to add 3 more justices next time we have a president. And people will like that. I mean, that's popular with 30% of the population. So
for sure.
We'll see. I mean, things like that will be argued. It's a horrible idea. I mean, if everybody who takes power, every party just kind of redesigns the Supreme Court to reflect their values, and then the next party does the same thing, that's a nightmare. So we'll see. Yeah. But anyhow,
we'll have 100 judges. We'll have 100 judges on the Supreme Court. They won't be able to agree on anything.
We will.
9
and
seems to be
it'll be like elected office. Yeah.
9 is optimal because other lower courts have a lot more judges, lower appellate courts, and especially the circuit courts, and it gets very difficult for them to achieve a consensus about anything. So this is going to be really fascinating to watch. They're going to have to give in, I believe, to most of Trump's program here. Certainly, they can't justify, we have this Impoundment Act where Congress basically took the purse strings away from the president back when Nixon was in the process of being impeached. They're going to have to walk that back because you can't say, like, if Congress says we're going to build a giant pit in the middle of, Colorado, and then we're going to take as much cash as we possibly can and throw it in that pit and light it on fire, at some point, the court cannot allow this.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a really interesting constitutional year where we get to hear some really high-level arguments. I'm looking forward to it because that stuff is fascinating. Does the Constitution allow you to do this? And what is the language? And how do you interpret the language? And what did previous courts say about this? I think that's interesting, and it's going to be fun this time. But yeah, the whole the president is in charge of the executive branch, but Congress is in charge of what the executive branch spends money on. Now, you can't have both of those things be completely true, right? So somehow they're going to have to sort that out. And the executive branch is allowed to decide how much these guys spend and to close down categories of the executive branch if they want to. Can Trump close down, for instance, the education department because it's within the realm of the executive branch, but Congress funded it. What's the answer to that? I don't know what the answer is going to be. Yeah. So what does the Supreme Court say about that? And if it comes down hard on either side, then that opens the floodgates for whichever side wins to just go to town, do anything they want to.
All right. So talking about U.S. aid, which isn't really what it's about, but we had the release of the Kennedy files, which nobody's gotten through, but there's a couple of interesting tidbits. But one of the things of interest, there's a lady named Ruth Payne, and she was instrumental. Without her, the assassination could not have happened. And it's been speculated that she's CIA. Her family was like buddy with Alan Foster Dulles. And, she was ejected from Nicaragua during the Contra whole thing. It's fascinating. So point is, like, nothing really earth-shattering, no smoking guns have come out yet. But we haven't gotten everything yet either. So, but the fact that they're releasing all this stuff and it's laden with agency disinformation too. So I had a discussion with Grok about it, and I basically convinced Grok that the company was involved. Grok is now 99% sure that the company was involved, whereas first, it's giving me a line of garbage, like maybe this and who knows. And then I proceed to go down the list of characters. It was the most fascinating thing you ever saw, John. It was fascinating.
Sounds fascinating. I didn't know you could have a conversation that changes an AI's mind And then is Grok out there now telling this stuff to other people who ask about it? Like, is
I
your
hope
opinion?
so.
Yeah, okay,
I hope
that's
so.
pretty
And
cool.
I asked it to rate my knowledge of the Kennedy assassination. It gave me an 8 out of 10 because it said I couldn't quote like frame by frame from the Zapruder film, and that I didn't quote like the Warren Commission page number reports and stuff. But it said I knew my stuff.
So, okay, two things about this. We know, even without this new stuff that came out, that LBJ and the CIA killed Kennedy. We know that,
Oh
and,
yeah,
and so this is, I mean, it's interesting to find out via documents that that's true, but we know they did it. The second thing is Dulles Airport still Dulles Airport?
yes,
Oh, they need to take
yes.
the Dulles name off of everything. Those people were monsters. The Dulles brothers were this nightmarish um, pair of monsters who somehow got real power in the U.S. government. So yeah, okay. What is Reagan International Airport still an airport?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was where they had the crash. That's
what about
DCA, and the other
what
one's DUL, I think, their symbols. Yeah,
what
there
about
was a
Kennedy?
crash.
Because
What's that?
I'm just trying to think of who we need to replace Dulles with on that Dulles International Airport name.
Well,
Yeah, because if Kennedy doesn't have an airport anymore, then we should totally make it Kennedy. But
well, he's got an airport in New York, but
okay,
yeah,
oh, that's
like
right. Okay,
yeah, and I was in Dulles, going to Europe to see my son, and I was reading the plaques there. I should have taken some pictures of them. There's a whole plaque about how he was instrumental in building the airport and all this stuff. And it's a pretty lousy airport,
that who
but
was
Dulles
Dulles?
was somehow involved.
If Dulles built an airport, it was just a way to launder money to use it to overthrow governments and murder
Might be
people. He
the
was a
other
monster.
Dulles.
Yeah. Well, I think they work together. I think there's guilt by association there. So both the Dulles brothers ought to be erased from American history.
It's actually John Foster Dulles
Mm-hmm.
that it was named after. And he was the Secretary of State, right?
Yeah,
And
Alan Dulles was
Allen
the
was
CIA guy.
CIA.
Yeah, he's the one who killed Kennedy.
Yes. So there is a reason why. It was named to commemorate Dulles's legacy and establish Washington, D.C. as a hub for international diplomacy and commerce. So, and it was designed by the same guy who did the TWA terminal, the Seagull, in Kennedy, which they've kept they turned it into a hotel. But what's interesting though is that you got that flowing and the big windows and the light and everything, but it really needs to be kind of totally removed and redone. But we'll see what happens. But
Well,
yeah, while we're at it, let's get rid of the J. Edgar Hoover building there for the FBI. Sends out the wrong signal.
you know what we need? We need a museum of corruption where we can go and see, because I mean, those are fascinating stories. J. Edgar Hoover deserves a whole wing of a museum of monsters, and so do the Dulles brothers. And
Yeah,
that would be that would be one of the great tourist attractions of the world, because people would come from everywhere
I love
to
it.
to have
Hey, man.
their opinion of the United States validated by seeing what all these monsters were up to.
We could set up an NGO to do this too, and
Oh, and
maybe
fund
get
it
some
with
money.
fund it with money made up by the Fed. Yeah,
They have the Mob Museum in Vegas, so why not the Corrupt
but
Politician Museum in DC? It
you
just
know
makes
who would
such
do that?
sense.
I mean, Elon Musk and Kash Patel would probably want to do something like that. If they
Hey,
ever sat around and talked about it, they would come up with a plan.
and we got so much empty office space now in DC.
Ooh,
I think
yeah.
maybe we take the USA building and make that into the Smithsonian of corruption, right?
I like it. I like
I
it.
think we're onto
Or
something here.
the FBI headquarters, one or the other, or they
Yeah,
could be
it could be.
branches of the yeah.
Well, the combination of corruption and deep state, you know?
Yes, yeah.
This is must.
That is a campaign plank right there. Well, Trump's not running again, but whoever runs next, if they say, "Hey, we're going to build this museum and put all the crazy monsters," and they could win a lot of votes with that.
I got a better idea. How about if you and I start a GoFundMe campaign? What do you think? You up for it?
um, I I think that would be worth millions of dollars, and then we would get assassinated. So we wouldn't get a chance to spend the money. That would be the problem.
But I have a great idea. As we're building the museum, we pay out kickbacks to everybody. We make it an exercise in corruption to build the museum of corruption.
Yeah, just say we're going to do it. We would tell everybody that,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, and we're going to bribe the congressman there. Okay.
And we'll go back. I think, we should go back in history and find the most corrupt people like Nero and how they stole. And we could just go back and this, I don't know, might have to take several blocks, John, to really honor it fairly.
Because just the U.S. would be a city block, and if we went through the whole world, that would be a tourist attraction for the ages. There, it would generate billions of revenue every year. So,
if we could sell gold cards for people for $5 million to become a citizen, that's kind of brilliant, because that'll bring in $1 trillion overnight. You just got to sell 200,000 of them.
I saw a headline that said they were selling pretty well.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
10,000.
Because here's how I think if I was a super rich guy in China or Russia or Brazil or someplace, I would give my college graduate kid a card like that as a graduation present, because boom, you're a dual citizen.
Well,
and that would work right there.
I'll tell you a little story here. In Jupiter, Florida, you've been there.
I have.
There is a development, and it was put together by some maybe not the most reputable people, and they couldn't get financing. It was after the global financial collapse. So they went to DC and they got the EB-5 law changed because it didn't used to apply to real estate, which said if you put $500,000 into a business and employed X number of people, you could get a green card. And they did this with 200 investors for 500 grand each, all right, which comes out to 100 million. The project has never made any money because they made their money selling green cards. And this became a way of life for the government. So this is just an extension of that, getting more money than it's worth. And you're some oligarch in Russia, or you're some guy in China who's stolen billions, and you need your bug out plan, right? You need your escape plan. You send your wife and kids there, which is what they're doing anyway, and the U.S. citizenship really takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, it becomes a brand then, because you know exactly what you're getting when you buy that gold card. Whereas, there are lots of invest for citizenship plans. There's like a 1.5 million one that gets you into the EU, but they don't have brand names. They're just like, hey, we've got to call up Cyprus and see how that thing works. But with the US, it's like, I just want a gold card. There's somebody you call. So there's a lot to be said for Trump. Branding. Yeah, he's good at branding. Yeah,
it's his genius. They pay him all that money to put his name on buildings, or they used to, millions and millions of dollars. So, the Trump gold card, I think it's got the right cachet. They supposedly have sold out 10,000 of them, which is like $500 million.
Yeah.
Or 50 billion. Yeah.
See that you're making a dent in the deficit when you do something like that. Like if they can knock $100 billion a year off of the deficit, that's a noticeable difference, The
way you do it, though, is it's a limited time offer. We're only selling X amount. This is the genius. Scarcity. If you don't get in now, we don't know if you're ever going to get in. And then, of course, you do it next year, too, because it's too good a grift to let go. And you add in some tariff money, and, pretty soon I have a theory, John. We'll just touch it briefly and we'll talk more about it next time. I wrote an article about it. The U.S. Strategic Crypto Reserve. Okay. They took 200,000 some odd coins from Ross Ulbricht. They might have taken another several hundred thousand. Maybe they are holding 1 million Bitcoin. All right. So right now that they say it's worth 20 billion. But if, Trump, the master marketer, gets everybody convinced that this thing is going to the moon and it goes up another thousandfold, thousand, times, which we saw it do. So you could create something out of nothing. Basically, this crypto has no value, but because everybody's behind it all of a sudden and it can't make any more, it increases to 10 million a coin. And then you say to all the bondholders, hey, we're not in the bond issuing paying business anymore, but here's some crypto for you. And you're getting, if you take it now, you'll get 110%. But if you take it later, you'll only get 90%. Voila, our debt is paid off. Maybe they'll pay it out in Trump coin and Melania coin too.
Well, that would be there would be chapters in future history books called the Great Pump and Dump, the Great U.S. Pump and Dump. Because, well, the dump would be brutal if they did that, though, right? Because if you're sucking $10 trillion out of somewhere.
Yeah, but you do it in such a way that, you're going to retire it over a set period of time, 10 years, right? And everybody can elect 10%. They can elect the first 10% that says yes. And then you say, oh, we got such an overwhelming response. Let's do 30, right? And then I'm telling you, John, it's like there's no other way that they can really ever pay this off except to create something that has no value and make it seem like it has infinite value and then use that to pay it off. I mean, it reminds me of an algebra question, which of course I was lousy at math and I never knew. But two companies want to go to this hotel and they have infinite numbers of salespeople. They're going to have a convention there. And the hotel has an infinite number of rooms. How do you fit those two companies into it? Because, it's infinite demand, infinite supply. You know what the answer was? You alternate every other room. One goes to company A, one goes to company B. You have an infinite number of rooms and an infinite number of people, but that's how you fit them all in.
Okay. Well, okay, maybe, but I want an honest government someday. So
Yeah, well,
I don't like the idea of that pump and dump. The gold standard that we might have to go to. I'd rather just see that happen and be done honestly. But what are the odds of that? That we do.
What do you
it
have to value
honestly,
gold
really?
at, though? You can't value gold high enough to pay off the debt. Can't be done.
Not to pay off the debt. Well, see, that's the problem is what do we do with the debt as part of this? Because we have to be able to pay it off somehow, some way. But we lower the value of the debt by raising the price of gold.
Yeah.
And then you enrage the people who get screwed because they own the debt. And see, that's the battle of going to a gold standard is that you have to screw over the people who trusted the government. And then you have to survive their anger afterwards.
Storming the palace.
Hey, and it's owners of government bonds, right? So that it's high-powered people, people who
It's easier.
can definitely storm the government. Yeah,
It's easier to just pay them in crypto, honestly, and then you still have the gold. Hey, by the way, we neglected one of the most important stories, which I've written a couple of articles about on Financial Survival Network, and don't forget RubinoSubstack.com for John's latest articles. So they're going to audit the gold reserve. So I talked with Craig Hemke about this. This automatically means that the gold is there or something that looks like gold is there because they would never open up the vaults. Because what would happen, John, if we get there and the vaults are empty?
That would be the highest rated TV show of all time. That's for sure.
Geraldo could make a
Yeah,
comeback.
Geraldo. Yeah, he could bring Geraldo back just for the showmanship part of it, and let him actually find something. But one of the big stories of the past month has been all the gold flowing from London to New York. And it could be that the U.S. is restocking Fort Knox in anticipation of having to have the thing be audited. So, those two stories fit together pretty well. But you're right, they won't go. I don't think they'll go do it if their gold isn't there, because that would cause a major currency crisis here, I think.
It would blow up. The whole economic
really
system be gone. Dollar.
But you know what it would do, though, was it would guarantee Trump's reputation forever, because that's such a brave thing to do. Like, look, we've been screwing up, but we're just going to admit it here. I'm going to be the one who's going to tell you the truth. And of course, he would probably die the next day. But still, his reputation, his legacy would be assured. But yeah, there's so much interesting stuff happening right now. And we haven't even talked about the Epstein files,
next time.
Which they're promising. Yeah.
Next time. And we've like come a long way here. We paid off the national debt and we got a museum of corruption. I mean, I think we've done enough for this show, John. The Museum of Corruption, man, that is genius.
Carrie,
I'm going to start a GoFundMe campaign.
Yeah, don't put my name on that. I don't want to die.
No. We'll use pseudonyms. I'm good at that.
Okay.
All right. Hey, so Rubino, Substack.com, FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. The link is there. Sign up for our newsletter. John, we'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Thanks, Carrie. See ya.